let me break away. I want to bring in Sarah Sanders, White House press secretary. She joins us right now. Sarah, thanks for being with us.
Good evening. Great to be with you.
So Republicans will retain control of the U.S. Senate. It's looking less and less likely they'll retain control of the House. What are the surprises here, if any, for you tonight?
Look, I think a huge victory for the president tonight with the announcement of the Senate looking like it's definitely going to stay with Republicans and pick up a couple of seats. The president spent the last week campaigning heavily for Senate candidates, and we're seeing that pay off. Certainly in places like Indiana, Tennessee, Texas, all places that the president came in, helped close the deal, and certainly a good night for the president so far.
Sarah, I know that the president's having a watch party with 100 of his closest friends, and I'm sure you're among them. Have you been with the president tonight? What is he saying about these results, particularly that he's about to have divided government for the first time in his tenure as president?
I have, and the president is happy and thinks he's had a great night, particularly when it comes to the Senate, and still some solid wins in the House with folks like Andy Barr. But look, the president's going to fight for exactly what he's laid out, regardless of who's in control in the House. The president's going to be able to work with Democrats and Republicans to make sure we're getting things done, because that's what he came to Washington to do. He's laid out a bold agenda, and we'd expect him to continue to follow through and have another successful 2 years, just like he's had the previous 2 years.
The president announced some regrets today in an interview about the tone that he has had as president. Are there any regrets about going after immigration? It looked like the #1 topic for voters this time around was health care.
Not at all. This is a topic in a huge crisis on the border. The president is going to focus on problems that this country has, and he's going to continue to do that. He's been talking about this for a long time, and we want to see the solutions actually take place. We have to secure our borders. We have to know who's coming in, why they're coming, and what they're going to do when they get here. We certainly want to have immigration in this country, but there's a right way to do it, and the president wants to see that happen. We support merit-based immigration, and we support a secure border. That is not something that the president's ever been shy about. He's going to continue to talk about it, and hopefully Democrats will actually show up and do the job that they were elected to do and be willing to work with the president to get something done. Not just continue to be a party of obstruction and resistance, but actually come to Washington and try to bring solutions to the table and solve some real problems.
Sarah, it's a common story after midterms. The president might make changes in his cabinet. What are the chances that we see some of those personnel changes in the next few days?
I'll leave those decisions to be by the president. I don't certainly have any announcements on that right now. We're focused on the night ahead of us. Again, a great night for the president with the Senate. I think that's a huge victory for him, and we're going to continue watching the other races throughout the evening.
All right, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, good to see you. Thanks so much for spending time with us tonight.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.